Let me get your response, Jason, to Phil Steele's ranking of the offensive position units. And then just to give some context, I'll give you the top 5 in the country and some teams in the SEC that obviously Oklahoma is going to match up against. Offensive line. Georgia's number 1, Texas 2, Oregon 3, Oklahoma State 4, Florida State 5, LSU's at 6, Tennessee 8, Ole Miss is at 13, and Oklahoma at offensive line, according to Phil Steele, is number 47.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's. I mean, I don't know if they will obviously end up being that. I mean, I think it's fair to have them early on, right? I mean, I think there's a couple of there's a couple of different levels of thinking when you look at this. I think when you look at the offensive line, and I agree, I think this is probably a more talented offensive line than what Oklahoma has had last year. I think the transfers that they brought in, not on not all levels, right? Because you're losing a guy at left tackle, Anton Harrison, who he was a first round draft pick, right? So when you lose a guy like him, obviously you expect that to be a bit of a downgrade, and it doesn't necessarily mean the guy coming in as a bad player, but you're not always necessarily going to going to bring in number one draft picks in the portal, right? So I think just from when you look at it from a talent perspective, I think the talent perspective may be a little bit higher than number 47. However, we all know the offensive line is a group probably more than any other position group on both sides of the ball where it's critical that these five work as one unit. They are very cohesive together. So when you bring in and think about, obviously there's a lot of time to go and there's a lot of battles to be fought in fall camp. But if you have four of your five starting offensive linemen coming from different schools, then I think there's probably some valid concerns on how that unit is going to be able to gel together playing for the first time. So I don't think it's if you talk to anyone, I think it's the clear number on both sides of the ball. It's the clear number one concern is the offensive line. So to have them that low, I think if you go into the season and there is 46 other offensive lines across the country that's better than this Oklahoma offensive line, then I think you run into some concerns from a record perspective, what Oklahoma will end up having, right? But so they're obviously going to have to um, be a little bit better than a lot of people think. And I think the thought is that, I mean, at least at SEC Media Days, I think the thought mark is that this offensive line isn't going to be that good, right? I mean, this is one of the reasons why they're picked eighth is because, I mean, look at a team like LSU. LSU loses a ton offensively. You lose the Heisman Trophy winner, you lose a couple of first round draft picks at the wide receiver position, and they're picked fifth. One of the reasons why they'll probably have one of the best offensive lines in the SEC in the country. So I think it's very critical that this offensive line, I mean, at the very least, play as well as they did last year, but not have any dip.
Quarterback room. So this is the entire room. However, the starter, I don't know what kind of percentage he puts on this because obviously this is kind of a different deal when you rank quarterback rooms because if the starter doesn't get hurt, then it doesn't matter who else is there. But if the starter gets hurt, then all of a sudden the backup is everything. All right, quarterback rooms. We've got Texas at 1, Georgia 2, Oregon 3, Alabama at 4, Ole Miss 5. Then we've got Missouri at 23, Texas A&M 26, Florida 28. He's got Oklahoma at 43.
I think again, very similar conversation, right? I mean, for a different reason. Obviously, you have to balance the talent that you expect to see out of Jackson Arnold with the lack of experience. So I think that's obviously one side of things, right? But I think with what they've got from Casey Thompson, I think that provides a little bit of a um, security blanket for Oklahoma as far as that goes. But I think, Mark, I don't know what you're hearing, kind of nationally on your side. I just don't think I just don't think nationally there's a lot of people that have a lot of respect for what Oklahoma is going to put out there this year, right? And maybe it's mostly because of the schedule, maybe it's moving to the SEC just in general, or whatever it is. But I mean, you don't really hear anyone outside of the Oklahoma circle, right? Just really gushing about what this Oklahoma team can be. And so I don't know if it's really naivety on the Oklahoma side, because I see a lot of even some of the local media in terms of picking. They mention um, what their order of finishes is, and a lot of the Oklahoma media feels like Oklahoma is probably in that 4 to 6 range versus the SEC, and kind of nationally a lot of people got Oklahoma in that 7 to 8 range. So um, I think it's more I heard this mentioned this week. I think it's one of the more, for me as well. I mean, I wholeheartedly agree. One of the more exciting seasons in quite some time, just because everything that's new for Oklahoma, and navigating. And I heard this said just brilliantly, that feels like, to a certain degree, Oklahoma is fighting against, maybe not necessarily against, but they're fighting for historically what Oklahoma means. Because I don't think there's a ton of respect coming in, um, for what that has meant historically. So um, it'll be, like I said, it's one of the most intriguing seasons I can remember, just to see after Oklahoma gets some games in. Okay, Oklahoma's going to be able to adjust just fine to the SEC. May not be a contender year one, but they'll get there. Or is it one of those? Or is it one of those situations where, oh gosh, this is a lot tougher than most people thought coming in? Oklahoma roster wise may not quite be ready. I tend to think it'll probably be somewhere in between, and um, so I think it's been a long time since Oklahoma's been in this situation. Oklahoma, I don't remember. I mean, outside of maybe the '90s and what most Oklahoma people consider like the reign of terror, like between John Blake and um, Schnellenberger and that group, is Oklahoma being picked eighth in a conference is just not something that's ever happened. So I think you see a lot of people, at least locally, are reacting very similar to the way that they reacted when Lincoln Riley went to USC. Like, it just doesn't happen. Like, OU doesn't lose, Oklahoma doesn't lose coaches unless they're going to the NFL, or unless they're retiring or leaving. They don't leave for a different job, or what would be considered by most as a lateral at best job.
Hmm.
And same here. Like, people like eighth, middle of the pack in the conference. Like, Oklahoma doesn't get picked in the middle of the pack. It's third or fourth worst. So I think there's that, and I don't know that I would call it a battle, Mark, but I think it's just that conversation that's happening, both nationally and locally, on, okay, what's Oklahoma going to be? What are they going to be? And what's a success? Like, I even posted this out on Twitter, or X, a few days ago. Like, what's considered a disappointing season? Not necessarily an unsuccessful season. But what's disappointing to you And there's some that are out there that are saying anything less than 10-2. Now you take that with a little bit of a grain of salt, but there's some out there that are saying, if anything less than like 7-5, 8-4 is is considered um, would be considered disappointing, and I can live with that because you know you, 6-6 is not something that you want to happen in the SEC. But I think if you set your expectations on this team needs to have 10 wins, I mean there's a good chance that you're going to be disappointed because it's just a different animal, and I think there's just this thought process that it's not as big of an animal as some people lead it to believe. So
Yeah, you're right. Every time Oklahoma's brought up on this show or this channel, uh, or the SEC, I should say, is brought up, or the national landscape and the SEC factoring into the playoff, it's all about Georgia, Texas, Alabama. It's about that tier first, and then Ole Miss is brought up, and LSU is brought up, and then if you delve past that, Missouri's brought up, uh, Tennessee. I would say all those teams that I just listed, based on my observation and based on what's brought to me and what I see out there, all those schools are brought up before Oklahoma. Phil Steele, interestingly enough, regardless of what he posted about ranking those two units, and we'll get to the rest of the offensive units, if you look at his power poll, which this is strictly who he believes are the 134 teams in the country ranked without the schedule taken into consideration. Just these are the best teams. Georgia's the best team. Ohio State's the second best team. Oregon's the third best team, etc. He has Oklahoma ranked as the seventh best team in the country.
yeah, no, I think yeah,
He
it's
is
very
he has them fourth in the SEC. Not now he's not picking them fourth in the SEC because once he applies the schedule, he
mhm.
believes that they have a difficult schedule that's going to drag them down to number 20.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I think there's more yeah, I think there's more concern about when you look at Oklahoma about the schedule on top of on top of just joining the SEC just in general, but I think more so the schedule. And I think, Mark, this is just, it would be interesting to see if Oklahoma and Texas's schedule was flip-flopped on, what the perception would be because, I see a lot. I mean, now's the time of the season, Mark, right, when you're seeing people come out with their predictions and whatever it is, whether it's just kind of conference predictions or schedule predictions or whatever that might be. But in a lot of it, you're seeing Texas in the top three, top four, seeing Texas in the SEC championship game, um, things like that. But I just wonder, is it more about the schedule, or is it more about the talent coming back? And because this is Texas is a team that's lost a lot as well, off of last year's team, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, right? But um, I digress, but I think it would be interesting to see because I think there's just so much of that weight is being put on the schedule. Now, I don't know that I would necessarily this is just my cynical side coming out, I guess, just necessarily agree that when you look at roster from top to bottom, that Oklahoma has the seventh best roster in the country. Now, I mean, I don't know. I mean, we'll see, right? I mean, I think there's the thought from recruiting and transfer portal that Oklahoma's been able, maybe outside of the quarterback position, that Oklahoma's been able to upgrade from a talent perspective in every area on this team coming into 2024 versus where they were in 2023. So, I mean, I think you can provide some credence to that, but it'll be interesting. Yeah, the schedule is just it is what it is. Anytime, Mark, any prognostication, anything that I've seen when you look at when people are talking about Oklahoma, the first thing they say is schedule. They don't really talk about the talent coming back or what they brought in, but they're saying this, but look at the schedule. So, I mean, I think that's something that's going to continue to kind of get thrown in the face of this conversation as we move forward, and it's something that you're just not going to be able to discount. Now, I think next year it'll be one of those things. It's probably not as big of a conversation because Oklahoma's navigated through this schedule in 2024, and it's just, I mean, it's just flipped in 2025, right? So it'll be the same, except for obviously Texas will still be in Dallas, but it'll just be flipped a little bit. So um, yeah, I think and you made a good point. I mean, I think when you talk about schedules, it's more. I think it's more venue than it's venue, and it's some of these games that you're playing back to back, which is much tougher than they have been in the past.
Running back, Ohio State #1, Penn State #2, Oklahoma State #3, Liberty 4, North Carolina 5, Georgia 9, Texas 10, Texas A&M 11, Ole Miss 13, Oklahoma 21.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that one is the one. Now the other two, I think you could make an argument that Oklahoma's a little low. I mean, but I think that one is pretty spot on, right? I mean, you've got at least one guy that you think is probably 1,000 yard rusher if he's healthy, and Gavin Sawchuk, and with Taylor Tatum coming in, and then what you have at least from a talent perspective from Javante Barnes, I think that's pretty solid where that's at right there.
Wide receivers, Oregon 1, Missouri 2, Ohio State 3, Ole Miss 4, USC 5, Oklahoma 6.
Yep. I mean, I think you could, and I just kind of, I don't scoff at that, with the fact that Ohio State's 3 is a little bizarre to me. I mean, I know that they've lost a few, but they're going to have the best true freshman in the country, at wide receiver. But anyways, I think, yeah, top 10 I think is good. That's solid for Oklahoma there. I think you like I mentioned previously, I think it's the best position group on the offensive side of the ball. I mean, you can make an argument maybe the best position group on the team, but particularly on the offensive side of the ball. But if all these guys are healthy, this has a chance to be a top 5 receiving group in the country for sure.